I'm Bob Short, and this is another in our series of reflections on Georgia politics, sponsored by the Richard Russell Library at the University of Georgia. Today I'm joined by Cheryl Vogt, the director of the Richard Russell Library, and we are in Soperton, Georgia, with a very special guest. Few families have had more impact upon Georgia's political and business life than the Gillis family of Soperton, Treutlen County, Georgia. And we're honored today to have Jim L. Gillis Jr. as our special guest. Mr. Gillis, your family's political and business record goes all the way back to the late 1800s when your grandfather, Neil Gillis, founded a turpentine operation that evolved into one of the state's largest timber and naval store businesses.
Was your what was the primary family business before naval stores and timber?
You're asking me questions. You'll have to have to be with me. I'm almost 92, and I'm not as sharp as I used to be. But I'll be glad to talk to you about what little history I know, and particularly naval stores, and maybe a little politics. It's a pleasure to answer that. But the naval stores business is one of the oldest businesses in the world. It goes back to Genesis in the Bible, when the man in Noah to change his ship with his ark with pitch, and of course it goes on, and that pitch was used in lighting streets and various other purposes and waterproofing, and it was it was absolutely essential in the Navy. Back then there was no metal ships; they were all wooden ships, and they had to have this pitch to use in the cracks to seal them, so the ships would. In other words, it was probably to them what fuel oil and gas is now. And of course, when they made metal ships, and then that it changed it. But that's the way the name naval stores originated. And of course, it came to America when the first colony was Jamestown, and I think one of the first exports was pitch. They had found these stumps and trees up around Jamestown, and they made this pitch, and that was one of the first things. But that's the way it got its name, naval stores. And of course, the industry worked on down into North Carolina. There were reports in Jamestown that there were trees in North Carolina that would profusely bleed or secrete this resin, and so the industry, naval stores industry, moved from the pitch and that into naval stores into North Carolina. In fact, that's where North Carolina got its name, the Tar Heel State. And of course, it's naval stores is produced in the coastal plains, going from North Carolina all the way into Texas, from the fall line to the coastal areas. And it was during and after the Civil War one of the primary sources of income, other than cotton, in the South. So it was a tremendous part of the economy for years.
What kind of pine tree produces?
Only two species, slash pine and longleaf pine. They grow in the coastal plains area. Just north of here, in other words, the fall line, of course, runs in Georgia from below Columbus and Macon to Columbus, and it is a native species, slash pine and longleaf. And longleaf was the predominant pine in the older days for the simple reason they burned the woods, and it was a lot more tolerant to fire than slash. And of course, longleaf played out as the naval stores and timber industry progressed.
I understand when they collected the turpentine that initially they would collect it in the bottom of the tree. They would make like a bowl in the bottom of the tree.
Right. It was a rather crude operation, but with a big axe, they cut a hole in the bottom of the tree and made a pocket, and then they'd scar the tree, and the resin would run down in this hole, and then they'd take a dipper and dip the gum out. And of course that was where it originated. And of course that damaged the tree, and then after they had worked the tree as much as they could and abandoned it, then they came along and cut it for timber. And so it was really naval stores and timber, and then they cut it clear cut it over, and that's what we were left with in the late 20s and the 30s, was all this cut over timberland. And of course, most of it was a lot of it in farmland. But and then when we started the reforestation effort in the late 20s and early 30s, it was primarily slash pine that was planted. And of course, at the present time, they are putting emphasis on trying to plant longleaf in order to try to restore that species, but that's a government program. It's in effect now.
Now, you're about 100 miles from the coast here, so in the early days, how did they get this to market? I've heard that it would go down the river to Savannah.
A lot of it was. The naval stores business moved into Georgia about in the after the Civil War, and they would up and down the rivers, the Savannah and the Oconee and the Altamaha, and a lot of it was shipped by barges, and a lot of it there were railroads in, and a lot of it was shipped by rail. And of course, the first market for the raw material was Savannah, and Savannah came quite famous for all of its factory houses. That was people down there that had and organizations, businesses that would finance the farmers and timber and naval stores producers for money. They'd finance them in. The production begins in April and ends in October. That when the warmer the weather, the more production you get from tapping these trees. So in the wintertime, while you did all your preparatory work and you made your production in the summer, and they would finance these farmers, and then they in turn would ship that product to Savannah, and it was shipped by rail and water. It originally is.
Now, I know that for a long time you've been a member of the American Turpentine Farmers Association. How did that help production of the turpentine and making it a lucrative business? Well,
it's a business. After the Civil War, as I said, cotton and lumber and naval stores, that was about the only commodity you could sell. We didn't have pulp mills, and we didn't have these outlets for livestock. And about the only, that was primarily income that we had. And it was, you had probably in the 20s and 30s, when the early 30s, you had hundreds of little turpentine stills, little distilleries. Every man would have he'd get enough production to operate a still, and he'd make his own turpentine and rosin. and then it was disorganized. In other words, if the price was good, they'd tap a lot of trees, and if it was bad, there was no organization to it at all. And so a lot of the producers, Judge Langdale and large producers, and they got together and realized that they had to organize in order to try to get some kind of orderly marketing and to try to stabilize the industry, which they did, and that was a big salvation to the industry. And they worked through the association and had signed up the membership, which they paid dues. And through that organization, they were able to go to Washington, being a seasonal crop, primarily June, July, and August, 3 heavy producing months. The market would always be so much on the market, it's a question of supply and demand. So they created these commodity credit programs for naval stores, and then they could, if the price was real low, they could place the turpentine and rosin in the loan commodity credit loan program, and then when in the wintertime when they wasn't producing any, then it could be redeemed, and that kind of helped stabilize the industry. They also, as I say, there was lots of timber back then. It wasn't any problem. And most of these people producing the gum, they owned some land, but they leased timber from the neighbors and farmers and all. And so the timber was, they'd cut small timber, which was not good, and the larger the tree, the better the production. So, but through that they created a government program, the Naval Stores Conservation Program, where you had to meet certain credentials in order to qualify, which paid a little part of the program, but it really, but there was any numbers, and particularly in merchandising the turpentine and rosin and advertising, and the associate. Without the association, I don't think the industry would have lasted near as long as it had.
Who are the main users of naval stores?
Well, back then there was a lot of it used in soaps, and particularly paints and varnishes. Rosin was used in varnishes, and then paper size. All your newsprint with that resin in it today, it's not. It wouldn't. They're actually it's used in the process of making paper. It has from chewing gum to shoe polish to most anything you can think of, and it involved a lot of uses. And of course, the turpentine itself was used as paint thinners, and a lot of your Vic salve, which you've heard about, has got a base of turpentine in it. And but the chemical end of it is a pretty big end of it now.
Now, Bob mentioned that your grandfather, Neil Gillis, was he was the first one in your family to produce the gum naval stores?
There's really no accurate records as to when it was, but from the best I can determine, it was in around probably 1890, and long in that area. He had a turpentine still, and he had a couple of brothers. My granddaddy was always in politics and farming, and so the three of them together organized a little business and started it then. And then it involved from them with my daddy whenever he got involved in it, and really had the foresight to promote the business, and that's where it started. It started through my grandfather and his two brothers.
Do you think there'll be anyone from the next two generations of Gillises to carry on the family business?
Oh yeah, I think so. We, of course, naval stores, the last, we won't go into that right now, but it ceased production in 2001. But the farmland and timber business, the same land that my great grandfather came in 1819, is still in the family. And of course, we've accumulated a lot of property, and that's primarily our business now, is the timber business, growing pine trees.
So naval stores are not as prominent in your business as it
No,
used to be.
as I say, naval stores was about the only cash crop for a long time. Cotton, we produced cotton. We didn't have tobacco in this area until the 30s, and then the pulp mills came in the late 30s, and up until then, why it was naval stores was one. It was about the only cash product, but then after 1940 and the war started, that's when we really went to making changes, and it was still a lot of gum naval stores was produced up until it went to dwindling in the 70s. And we had the timber prices went high. And the sawmills didn't particularly like these faces where it's been scarred, and we had labor. Unfortunately, it was practically all hand labor. And labor prices, of course, after World War, after 1940, the people left and went to the shipyards and various places, and a lot of them didn't come back. And labor began to get scarce. It was plentiful at one time. And then your tree got to be valuable for sawmill and poles and various other wood products. And then your foreign competition, People's Republic of China, they are the largest producers of gum naval store in the world. We were at one time in America, but they are now and have been. And they could produce turpentine and gum turpentine and rosin and put it down in the ports here on the East Coast cheaper than we could produce it here. So between those three things, between labor and the high price for the timber and the competition there, it eventually just played out, and there wasn't enough. There was still some being produced, but not enough to warrant a processing plant to operate.
Well, I was going to ask that question. Did you do your own processing
Yes, sir.
here?
At one time in the 20s and 30s, there was probably 2,600 here in Georgia, turpentine stills, little distilleries, and they produce their own turpentine and rosin. And of course, in the 40s, they got some central processing plants, and they could use standard. They are cleaning the gum better and better processing methods, and they could get a product. They could guarantee a melting point in the rosin, and they could all these. And then you had at that time a lot of these small farmers. They wouldn't make enough to own a little still or something, so that would give them a central market where they could take their maybe 8 or 10 barrels or 4 for any amount. They could take it to this processing plant. They'd weigh it and pay them for them, and we had about, I guess 15 plants. We had here in Georgia, we had plants in Douglas and McRae, Vidalia, Tifton, Valdosta, Brunswick. You had then it was close enough that you could deliver your raw material to it, and which was good because it kind of standardized the product, but that was the end. About the 40s was the end of the little turpentine, small turpentine steel. They was, as I say, they was I'd say about 2,600 of them at one time.
Did you sell to a broker or do you sell directly to your customer? The user.
Your gum.
Yes.
Well, we had you had to, as a producer. I could. They had a plant in Swainsboro. They had a plant in Vidalia. They had one in Baxley and one in McRae. And usually you had an opportunity to merchant to get the best price you could out of it. See, and but it was they all were good and all paid virtually about the same price. So it's just a question of the farmer where he wanted to deliver his product.
Well, now let's talk for a minute about Jim L. Gillis Jr.
But
I noticed you were born in McRae.
no,
I'm sorry.
McDonough.
And
Locust Grove.
Locust Grove. I'm sorry. But you lived most of your life in Soperton.
That's right.
What was Soperton like back in those days?
Back when it was Soperton was. It was created about 1900, before Treutlen County, of course, and when the railroad came through, that's what got Soperton started. And my mother was from Henry County, from Griffin, and my daddy, they had gone to school in McRae, and then they went from there up to Locust Grove, and that's where he met my mother in school up there. And I was born in Locust Grove, and then when Daddy was in the process of building a home down here, and so when they got the home built, maybe I was a few months old, and I was here, so I've been here most of my life. And Soperton is along with all these other small towns. We had 2 or 3 car dealers. We had about 4 or 5 doctors, and it was transportation then wasn't like it is now. And it was. I can remember when I was real small, riding in horse and buggies, and in fact, when I was in the first grade or two, I had a neighbor. We lived about 3 miles out in the country, and he had a little horse and a buggy, and I rode with him for about a year, coming to school. And then they got the school bus system. But a lot of these little towns have, of course, they're having a hard time now with all these larger stores, and it's changed, but in a lot of ways they haven't changed a lot. But it was a central point then. You bought your groceries here. You had your doctors here. In fact, now we have doctors that are here, but they come from Dublin or Swainsboro or someplace, and they're temporary. And most of your stores, of course, like everywhere else, Walmarts and all your larger chain stores have people that go somewhere to trade, and they're having a hard time. most all these little small counties and small cities are struggling.
Before we get too far away, I would like to talk with you for a minute about the creation of Treutlen County. That was your grandfather who was in the legislature, and your father.
No, my grandfather was in the Senate,
Yes, sir.
and my father was in the legislature.
Yes, sir. Okay.
And they are the two that created the county, 1917. And there's an article there I want to give you a copy of that it tells about my father visiting all the legislators in Southwest, all over Georgia. He'd just go and talk to them about the getting votes, and he said if they asked him to spend the night, he spent the night and he ate meals with them, and he got to know them. But they worked. The two of them worked up. Well, they created the county in 1917.
And the county was created from?
From mostly Montgomery, some Emanuel, mostly Montgomery and Emanuel counties.
So then you were off to the University of Georgia.
Sir?
Then you were off to the University of Georgia.
Yes, sir. I graduated here in 1933, and I was 15 years old. I was, of course, but I got an education. It came pretty fast. I was scared that I was going to flunk out up there, and I studied pretty hard and made the dean's list, and then I found out that you could have a good time, so I kind of mixed it all in together.
With a degree in forestry.
Yes, sir.
Did you know when you went to the university that you wanted to be a forester?
Yeah, I think so. We had this land, and I loved trees, and I'd had in my FFA projects. I had planted some trees, and that was and then of course the naval stores business was big then, I haven't regretted it. I've graduated in '37.
And came back home?
No, I had there was 18 in the graduating class, and 2 of us got jobs. And I worked with in Baxley as a assistant district forester for 6 months, and then at home we had my daddy was in the legislature, and he was primarily running. My uncles then were real old and wasn't able to run the business, and they had I don't know how many families at one time. We had on the operation living on our property and joining over 100 families, over 100 employees, and so it was just somebody had to come in that would be here. In other words, business just couldn't run itself, and so I fell into it, and I didn't work my way into it. When I got here, I was in it. And but it was when I was in Georgia, I went to business school at night. I was going to get a business school education, and so I got into shorthand, and I decided that if I was going to have to do that for a living, I'd come back home and do something like that. But anyway, it worked in well because that business school helped me a lot with when I moved in here, because they didn't have they kept most of the records on the back of a paper sack, and the Social Security had started, and the employee paid 1 cent, and the employer paid 1 cent. So it was the beginning.
But you found time then to run for the state senate.
Well, that was in that was in '38 when I came back, January of '38, and I was in the Senate in 45 and 6. And we rotated, Emanuel and Lawrence and Treutlen counties. And so when it was Treutlen County's time, several of them encouraged me, particularly my father. And so I was in the Senate. And I believe the next term or the next one, they did away with that unit system and had it by popular vote for all the counties involved. But I was married and had three babies, and that being in Atlanta didn't blend in too well with my politics, and so and then between my father and my brother, why they liked the city and I didn't, so it worked out good. I stayed in, ran the business, and but it was we did lots of farming. And, I had people that lived on these farms, and today I imagine they were 300 or 400 farmers in Treutlen County, and it went from cotton and then went from tobacco, and everybody was growing hogs and then a few cattle, and it was in fact after 1940, after World War II, these farms they were left, and these farms kind of went to dwindling, and we'd convert them into pastures and run livestock, and then it went from the pastures and row crops to slowly into pine trees. And now, I think there's 5 or 6 farmers left in Treutlen County, and one of them's a sod farmer. And they're all big, but that's all the farming we got. The rest of it's in pine trees. And that's pretty well true all over the southeast, because we've got an unlimited, we can grow pine trees on any type soil. And but it's been a lot of changes in that. In fact, the economy is what drove everybody out of the farming business. They just couldn't pay for it. And of course, it's and I think the large farmers now are having it pretty. They're really not making a lot of money. Fertilizer's $300-400 a ton. No, I don't know what it is. It's just double, just about double. It goes up so much, and all the well, you're familiar with what the economy is now.
Were you in Atlanta during the 3 governors fight?
No, sir.
You weren't there?
No, Ellis Arnold was governor when I was there.
And was your brother Hugh in the House?
Yeah, I think he was in the House. He was in the House for, I don't know, he can tell you 7 or 8 years, and then he went from the House to the Senate, and I think he was there around 56 years. It's been a long tenure. He can tell you that. He had a long record. And of course, my father was involved with the highway department for about 24 years.
But you didn't get out of politics. You came home, became a county commissioner.
Naturally, no. I was mayor 5 years, and then county commissioner, and one time the grand jury appointed a commissioner, and I was county commissioner for 40 years, and I had, I think, opposition twice. I was very fortunate.
Some people say we have too many counties in Georgia. You agree with that?
Well, that's being from a small county. it's there's a lot of advantages and disadvantages, and but I think the economy, unless these small counties can go to consolidating services and make some changes, I don't think you're going to have consolidation by legislation. You're going to have it by necessity. In other words, the economy is going to demand it, and I think eventually you're going you're going to have it. I don't think it's because it's for what this as it is right now. Your county is financed just about two ways, sources of income primarily. That's ad valorem taxes and sales taxes. And there's a limit. There's a limit to your sales tax, but it seems to be no limit to ad valorem taxes. And something's going to have to give. And your education, I think the federal government demands the state to have all these different criteria as they have to meet, and then the state passes that on to the counties. And in fact, about half of the money, tax money we collect, goes into education. And it's, but I don't know. It boils down to the economy, what we can, whether they can afford it. That's going to be the main thing.
Most of your young people in Treutlen County today, where are they working? Are they working here in the county, or are they going to surrounding counties?
Very few. Most of them have to go somewhere else for a job. Mm-hmm. And the ones that want to go to college, they go to college, and then of course they've got a choice of specializing in what they might do. And
have you had much immigration in this county? Do you have many?
No, not
Asians,
not permanent.
Hispanics?
We've got some. We are having more from India coming in and buying stores and filling gas stations, and then we have these farmers these big farmers. They're growing tobacco and they're growing Vidalia onions, and everything they grow, it's they've got hand labor. Mm-hmm. And they live in Toombs County, mm-hmm. A pretty heavy population around Glenville and Reedsville and Tattnall County, and of course we think we've got a lot of them here. Most of them migrate from one county to the other, mm-hmm. But we don't have a big population, no. But in some counties they do. And I didn't realize it, but North Georgia, Dalton, these textile mills and poultry plants and all are heavily dependent upon them. Mm-hmm. And if they want to work, mm-hmm. and without them, I don't know I don't know what would happen to the production. Mm-hmm. Of course, this immigration question. I don't want to get into that because that's as you know from what you read in the paper every day, that's a hot topic today.
Are there any plans for sort of a renewal of this community, trying to build it up, rebuild it?
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. Every little county, they've got a development authority, and they've got a chamber of commerce, and they've been working diligently to get industry into these places. Dublin up in Lawrence County, in Statesboro, and then name them. They with the sales tax. The sales tax is really designed for the consumers. I mean, you spend your money, and that's why you pay your tax. And so about everybody here, and so just for an example, in Soapton and Treutlen County, they either go to Vidalia, Swainsboro, or Dublin. And Dublin's has really grown. And of course that's the north end of the county, about 15 miles. And so commuting is not a bad trouble. They've got a 200-bed hospital up there, and they've done an excellent job in getting big industry, all different kinds. Of course, Congressman Vinson up there was Lawrence County was his favorite. He put in a big VA hospital, and they've gotten just any numbers of industry up there. They've done a great job of doing that. And we've got a development authority here. It's doing a real good job. In fact, we've got one of the first in the world, I think, of producing ethanol from cellulose, from trees. And it's in the process of being built now. And it's going to be a tremendous thing. And they're going to produce the raw material, and my understanding is they're going to truck it by rail, or I don't know exactly, and then of course it's close to I-16, but then they will have ethanol plants, and we are 70 miles from Macon and about 100 from Savannah, and they're going to have plants there to refine it and make the finished product. But it's in the process of being built now, which we hope it will be a big help to this area. And of course, they are looking at getting the raw material from a radius of 75 miles a year. But and it looks very favorable. There's no question about the raw material. The raw material is here. And everywhere you look, you see little planted pines from all ages. And so we're looking for, we hope it materializes. Now imagine with the price of gasoline now at $4, while everybody else is kind of hoping we'll have a cheap source of fuel.
Well, I hate to change the subject, but I would like to talk to you for a minute about Mr. Jim, your dad.
Yeah, well,
24 years in the highway department. They tell the story about when these county officials used to come to the state capitol. They didn't want to see the governor, they wanted to see Mr. Jim.
well, my daddy, I was born in politics, and he was. As I say, in '17, he was in the House of Representatives, and then he came back here and he was farming, and he got involved with his father and uncles in developing Soapton naval stores, and he really got into that, and in the late 20s and early 30s, why. That grew from just a small operation to a big operation, and he really. I remember when I was a boy, he was up at 4 o'clock every morning. In other words, you had all these laborers, and you went to the woods to install your cups and to do this, and he didn't send somebody; he went with them. And he worked hard at that. And then when I came back, that kind of relieved him, and he was able to vote. In fact, for me to talk about my daddy. That's really kind of a tender spot in my heart, because he just left it up to me, and he was if I had the optimism, in other words, back when this land was cheap, he believed in the land, and when property had come up in this area, the North owned the South. Between the Federal Land Bank, John Hancock, New York, and Mutual, and these different companies, they had all this farmland. The farmers went broke, and these factories, houses with the turpentine people, they wouldn't loan money on land, but they'd lend it to you on a lease. But my daddy, you could almost buy land and all for what the lease was worth. And he believed in the land. And in fact, whenever he died, I don't think he had about $5,000 life insurance. But he had a lot of land, though. He believed in the land. And if I'd had the foresight he did, why, of course, I'm not suffering now, but no telling what we would have been worth. But he loved people, and he loved to help people. And but as I say, anything that he was good to me, and but quite an inspiration. I was real close to him. And in fact, after I came back in, he didn't worry about the business anymore. But he was but they say that's what politics is people. So,
Right.
but he spent a lot of time with the little man, people that anybody else. But
Well, if I remember correctly, he served with almost every governor in the latter part of the 20th century except Marvin Griffin and Jimmy Carter.
Ellis Arnold.
Ellis Arnold. He didn't serve with Arnold. Well, he was a very powerful man, and they sought him out for political advice and assistance, and he certainly deserves credit for electing several Georgia governors.
Oh yeah. My brother Hugh there's an article here that the Atlanta Journal, this was in '69, and it's right interesting little story there about my father. In fact, Hugh he was up there in the middle of it with him, and but he did. He was.
Very popular guy. Let's talk for a minute, if you will, about some of your civic efforts. You were very active in the Soil Conservation Service.
Yes,
with the Georgia Forestry Commission.
Right. I was. I've been, been a community interested in it, and we got one civic club here, the Lions Club, and in fact, I was just recognized for 70 years of service, and but then I was being into land. I was very much interested in soil and water conservation, and we had they organized in the 30s and 40s these soil conservation districts. And we had 5 counties. They started out with 3 and wound up with 5. And I started that in 39. And I was chairman of our district was the old Hoopy River District. And in fact, I was in when they organized the State Soil and Water Conservation Committee. But anyway, the first president was Mr. Holson back from Winder, and I was the second president of the Association of Soil Conservation Districts, district supervisor, and still am. But I'm fixing to give that up. But it's locally of this district. But I was chairman of the state committee for years, and all these watersheds. The greatest program we had was all this watershed program from North Georgia. In fact, some in Middle and South Georgia. But and then of course water then was a question of flood control. They build these big dams and they were constructed where they could hold much more water than the normal basin. And when you had a flood, why, that would stop it and keep it from just flooding everything down. And up in the mountains there, when you had a flood, that water, it gushed out of there. And then a lot of them used it for water supply. Lake Tobosofsky up here was a project. But that's been a real interesting deal. And of course, being in the timber business, I was associated with the Georgia Forestry Association from the time I came back here, and I eventually was president of that. And then when they organized the American Turpentine Farmers Association in '36, I believe. And I came back in '38, and then in '39 they had a vacancy, and I became a member of the board of the American Turpentine Farmers Association. And then when Judge Langdale resigned as president, I was president of the association for, well, still am, but the business has ceased now. But I've enjoyed all the jobs I had. Haven't paid anything, but I've really enjoyed the work and the people that are involved in it.
Speaking of the water and our water shortage, is there anything we could have done to prevent it?
Well, that's a good question. We're dependent, particularly from the middle Georgia south, on our subterranean, on our underground water supply. And there's been that's something now that's demanding more and more attention. We've wasted water. We haven't had any water problems up until the last few years. And of course now they are seeing more need for these reservoirs, particularly up in North Georgia. You've got rock formations, and you don't get your underground water like we have down in this part of the country. And then there's a limit to that. So I guess until you need something, we don't really recognize what could have been done. I'm sure that if we'd had the foresight, we could have built more reservoirs. We could have managed it, but it's your population is using so much water, and your population increasing until it's beginning at a point now that we're going to have to utilize everything that we can, from reservoirs to conserving water, and that's an important question. I don't know, but it's getting a lot of attention now, so I'm sure that it'll work out.
Does the state of Georgia harvest as much timber as we have in the past?
Well, the demand now, when you had your pulp mills, when your economy goes bad, it affects everything, and it certainly affected the timber business. Your sawmills now, right now, we are not producing as much because there's no demand. In other words, it's at a low ebb right now, and it's, I don't know, I think we like, in the timber business, like everybody else, we just hoping that this economy is gonna bottom out and pick up again, which I'm certain it will. But because there's a lot of people that have put all the eggs in one basket, and they've planted the land and timber and little trees, and they're expecting to get some revenue out of it. But and that's one thing, like I mentioned about this plant up here. If it's a big, it's, and we're gonna have to have more processing plants to handle it.
Are we importing too much lumber?
From Canada, yes. No question about it. They don't have to pay any stumpage up there. See, the government owns it all, and they can send lumber down here, and they hurt. They really and it's that their lumber is white looking and it's soft. No trouble, you can drive a nail in it with that. But it's not. It doesn't have the strength that this longleaf and slash pine, the Georgia pine, does. And but people like it, at least builders, because they can build faster with it, and they put out a good product. Other than that, but it's if I were building a house, I wouldn't want it in it, because the termites will have it before you know what's going on, and then too, it doesn't have the strength to weather storms and different things. But
Has NAFTA helped or hurt the timber business in Georgia?
I don't know. I'm not too familiar with our export markets and what actually is being exported. And but that'd be I guess it's a two-way sword, I guess. Two-edged sword.
How do today's environmental regulations affect your industry?
Well, I don't know as that it's the regulations that they've got. We living with them, and I think they're within reason. Some are, and some aren't. But most you're gonna have not anything gonna suit everybody, but it's overall I think they are necessary.
I'd like to ask you this question. You've helped Georgia progress from just another southern state to the Empire State of the South. What, in your opinion, is responsible for our emergence as the leader in the southern states?
Well, that's not only a good question, it's a big question. But I think probably Atlanta, your big cities. We've been a hub in the airline business. Atlanta has. We've gotten a lot of big industry in these cities, and Savannah, and we've had a good support. I think our water supply and our climate, our soil, we just got things in Georgia they don't have in most of these other states, particularly your western states and northern states. And it's but I think it's been a combination of all your industries and everybody working together trying to promote it.
You think political leadership has had a role in it?
Yes, sir. No question about it.
When do you think that turned?
Pardon?
If you look back on our political leadership in the state, at what point do you think that we began to progress more industrially and federally?
I'd have to give that some thought. I think it really began in the 40s with World War II. And that's when we brought in a lot of industry. And a lot of them, of these big industries, were still there. And since then, we've acquired more. But I think it started in the middle of the 20th century.
We're in the Gillis family cemetery in Treutlen County with Mr. Neil Gillis and Mr. Hugh Gillis. And Mr. Neil, why don't you tell us about when the cemetery, the oldest grave in the cemetery?
The oldest grave is down the smaller graves. That tall grave, the granite, is a memorial that we put up there in memory of Murdoch Gillis and Catherine Gillis. That was my great-great-grandfather and grandmother. And they came into this area in 1819. And he died in 1829. And he had several children which are buried along this line we are in now. And there were a lot of ladies. Back then there was no transportation, and you had a lot more old maids than you had in this day and time. And but they on the other side, there's two. Catherine Gillis on the other side was in. I believe she was born in what we'd say. But anyway, she would have had to been born in 1754. And they migrated from Scotland, northern Scotland, the Isle of Skye. And I think more than likely they had potato famines, and they were the terrain was rather rocky and not much as you could cultivation, and they were all looking for. They were hungry and they were looking for that. So they a lot of people migrated into Wilmington, North Carolina, and that's where most all the ships came in. And they get kind of crowded around Wilmington, I'm assuming, and they heard about the Pine Barrens. That's what this country is known as, the Pine Barrens. And probably they had little livestock, and so they heard about it. So they can't. That's when they moved in here. It was in 1819, and they probably had. I don't know, probably bought a cow and probably had some staple groceries, but this is where they settled.
It wasn't much of a life here raising cattle, was
well,
it, in this area?
They probably had sheep, and they had to survive. And of course they'd grow a little sugar cane and make the sugar and have the meat, have a garden, have potatoes and corn, and they survived as right. And they had to go once or twice a year to get staples like salt and other provisions. But it was a rough life. No doctors. How they survived, I don't know. And he had got a land grant, and then his oldest son, John, by him dying in 1829, kind of looked after the family and stayed until Catherine died, his mother, and then but then from John, he had a big family. He's buried in here. He was then all of them, this area we're in right now, it's been settled. It was right interesting. A couple of salesmen came through here in 1825 from North Carolina, and they were collecting where they had financed these pioneers with, I guess, supplies and so on, collecting, and they kept a diary of their travels. and they mentioned going into Williamson Swamp, that's up in above here at Louisville, and coming on down and spending the night on Michael Moore's Bridge on the Hoopie, which is about 6 to 8 miles over here. And then they came through this area right here and spent the night with a Neil Gillis. This was in 1825. And that he was real nice to them and wouldn't let them pay for breakfast. And then they forded Pendleton Creek. All our property is on Pendleton Creek. And so, but that diary kind of confirmed the fact they were here then. And and of course the family has been here ever since. And this practically everybody in here, with the exception of a few members of his descendants.
So it wasn't really until after the Civil War that the family started to prosper economically. Is that correct?
Well, I don't know. No, they were getting land grants in 1840s and 50s. I know John, who was Murdoch's oldest son, and he must have been a good businessman. Mm-hmm. And he acquired quite a bit of property. One grant was for 800 and something acres, and he got other grants. And but it was all, of course, well, anything you could grow, you had to grow. They used it to make a living, and to grow corn, and of course they make meal and grits out of the corn, and have corn to feed the livestock. And then the trees, the whole country was covered with original pine, longleaf and slash pine. Mm-hmm. In fact, in that article, there's those two guys, they refer that they could ride 10 or 15 miles and see nothing but pine trees and seldom ever see a leaf, because it was just wiregrass, which is a native grass in here. It was right interesting. And of course, my grandfather and father and all the families are buried here.
I was saying earlier that in a real pine forest that you could drive a horse and buggy through it without any obstruction. Is that not correct?
Right. These bricks, you can see the old brick back around this way. the men, the Pendleton Creek's about a mile down here, and on the banks of that they found them a spot where the clay would make brick. And they went down there and worked up the mud and with the feet and made brick, and took an ox cart and hauled it up here and put this brick wall around that side. And of course this part is new, but that's the older part of that.
So how many Gillises are buried in this cemetery, do you know?
I couldn't tell you that offhand, but all these graves you can see are Gillis graves.
And are the Gillises members of a particular church in Treutlen County? Or?
Well, they were Boiling Springs down here, which is an old community. My granddaddy, John, he gave them the logs to build the church. That was a Baptist church. I think some of them were Methodist, but what the religion was back in Scotland, I don't know.
Mm-hmm. You might have been Presbyterian. And,
probably.
Uh-huh. So most of the family is still buried here today.
Right.
Uh-huh.
And we have young ones that own lots here, so we have a cemetery committee, and 5 people on it, and we've got a pretty good little cash reserve, and we keep it up. So it's I hope it won't be long before I'll be a member out here. I got a brother here on the right. He's close behind me. So, but anyway, the young ones, they own lots out here. So I'm real happy that we'll be perpetuated for a while anyway.
Any talk of those who might be outside the brick wall yet? I know at the Russell family cemetery they actually have a couple who are outside the brick wall now. They're starting to sell lots outside the brick wall.
Well, I don't think we worry about that anytime soon. But the cemetery, does own, they own the property. They own about 15 acres. They own the land around here and the drive that we come in. The cemetery owns it, so it'll be perpetuated.
It's a lovely spot. It's just beautiful here.
I appreciate you saying that.
I think if you had to rest in a place and you knew where you were going, it's a lovely place to be. Yeah. Okay.
Good.
Yeah. Your grandfather's house is now that bed and breakfast inn. Did y'all see that?
Yeah, it's not. They were gonna have it. It's about, I don't. But that was his house. It was built in 1910.
Mm-hmm.
And, it's still in the family.
Mm-hmm. It is a beautiful house. It's really pretty. Is your father's house still standing?
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
My son Jimmy lives there.
Uh-huh.
And I got the old house that John, who's the father of my granddaddy, is still it's up there. And there's not a nail in it. It's put together with pegs. I think it was probably built. John, whenever my great granddaddy died, they lived in here. Usually they had the cemetery in the old days close to where the home was.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm assuming that's where they were.
Mr. Hugh, do you like being back in Treutlen County and not going to Atlanta?
I'm enjoying the rest.
You are?
You're right. And I made a few trips up there with Ports Authority.
Mm-hmm.
And several of my good old friends still there said, you better be glad you're not up here now.